Hey guys, thank you so much for watching this video. I have with me Dennis Muldaur. I am so excited to have him on. We've been friends for a very long time. And by the way, bro, thank you so much for choosing to do this with me today.
Of course, man.
I'm excited. Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Well, anytime, bro. You're a busy guy. I mean, you work in Hollywood, so it's kind of like trying to get an hour of your time is really good. But today I want to talk to you about the things that you do. And as far as I remember, I think we met at a camp, right? Yeah. Some years ago. And
2010.
Yeah. Wow. You remember? I think it was our first church camp.
Yeah.
So it's crazy how things, change. But I remember you were really good at videography, and then you kind of did some short films, and you kind of like progressed from there. And then I remember one time, so just so you guys know, we don't live in the same city. You used to live in Portland, and I lived in Seattle. And then I remember one time you called me, and you're like, bro, I'm thinking about moving to Hollywood. I don't know if you remember that.
I do remember that.
Yeah. And I remember like there's so much in your voice. You're like, man, I don't know. Like, is this the right thing? And like, I'm just trying to call you. Is this a confirmation? I know that you were pretty kind of like wondering if you should do it or not. So I guess my question is that why Hollywood? Why out of all places do you think that God called you to Hollywood?
Yeah, well, first of all, storytelling has always been such a big part of my life.
And you're really good at it too.
I mean,
yeah.
I'm just trying to be honest, with every story I tell. So, as artists, we look at our art sometimes and we're like, that's the most embarrassing thing that I've ever done,
I've done a few videos like that.
But like, it's just like, like if you love it, chances are you probably weren't honest enough with yourself. But if you put it out and you're like kind of cringing, I mean, I think that's a sign that you actually that you're growing. And if you post something and years down the road, or maybe like 6 months down the road, you're like, wow, I could have done that better, that means you're growing. So that's a good thing, But I think like why I moved to Hollywood was I just wanted to tap into just a wider world of storytelling, and I wanted to be connected with the right people, and I always knew that like being a part of that world was something that I was passionate about, and I knew that in order for me to really grow in my career and to make the types of projects I want to do in the future, I needed to know the right people. And so that city is literally booming, obviously, with filmmaking and stuff. So I just kind of felt like things got slow in Portland, and so I just needed like I'm always on the go, and I love moving quickly. So
did you get any pushback as far as moving? Because I feel like, especially if you're a Christian, it feels a lot of times that we kind of discount Hollywood, and we're like, well, we want nothing to do with it because it's just not a godly place.
Right.
The regular religious talk that we have, and I feel like a lot of times people just dismiss Hollywood. But I think you mentioned right before we talked about this, like God created all art, and it's how you use the art. So did you have like a lot of people push back and say, hey, you shouldn't go?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, first of all, my parents were super supportive of that. Yeah. So that was like huge for me, like confirmation that, I was good to go. But there definitely was some pushback where people, I think just as people we're a lot of times we're afraid of what we don't know. Yeah. And so if we're not comfortable with something, then we question it. But I feel like that's where like the most amazing things happen in your life, when you step into the unknown, and I think God really moves in those moments.
Do you think it was worth it to move?
Oh my gosh.
Because I know there's a few times in there that you're like, man, I don't, like you're questioning it. And I know that all of us have moments where we kind of start a decision, but then we kind of wonder, is this the right moment? And I'm pretty sure you had the same thing.
Dude, it's a grind out there, really. Like you have to come with the mentality that, because I remember actually when I spoke to you before I moved, and you said something that kind of stuck with me. You said, if you're not willing to crawl on glass and sleep on benches, don't go.
That's awesome.
I actually wrote it down, and I'm like, he's right. If I'm going, like I'm giving everything. Yeah. Like I'm gonna give everything. Because I'm young and I don't have that much holding me back at this moment in my life. So I figured that if I'm passionate about something, I might as well like make the move and actually go through with it.
Yeah. By the way, thank you for letting me stay at your house. Every single time I'm in Hollywood or in LA, like I just call you up.
You're always welcome, bro.
But man, I do see that when you walk through the city, you see a lot of young people that are sleeping on the street. And I always wonder about those people, and I'm wondering, like, they had dreams when they moved there, and something along the line, maybe didn't work, or they were rejected, and so on and so forth. And now looking at the Hollywood as a place in general, what would you say is the bigger struggle? You mentioned something about being authentic, or because I feel like people that they work in the environment where everything there's editing to it, and there's filter, unless it works for some kind of a reality show. But in general, right, like everything is very heavily edited. And it's very highly produced. And talk a little bit about what you told me before about, like, it's a struggle to be real and authentic.
Right. Yeah. I think being in Hollywood, it's different than anywhere else, because everyone there is literally to be the next director, be the next famous actor, actress. And so people don't really fully care about you. They just want to see how they can get to their dream quicker, right? Yeah. And in Hollywood, like, there's a thing where it's usually like half business and half relationship with people. Like, if someone's like trying to hang out with you, it's not because they like fully like you, but they know that like you have something that they can offer. Yeah. And it's not always like that, like, blunt, where it's like, oh, I'm going to use you. Like, it's just like a culture thing. Like, everyone is literally networking and connecting, and it's a normal thing where everyone helps each other out. But I think the biggest problem is people don't necessarily find the honest and raw people. And so they surround themselves with people that are afraid to tell them the truth in their face. And so what happens is you get hurt so many times that you just don't trust anymore. Yeah. And I think trust is such a big key component to doing life.
Yeah, developing any relationship is based on trust, right?
Literally, I think that's the biggest thing. And so I think in Hollywood, people fail. One of the reasons is because they don't have the right team around them. They don't have the right friends around them. Yeah. And looking back at my journey, when I moved there, if I didn't have the people I have around me right now, I don't think I would necessarily be in a I feel like I'm in a good place right now. And I don't think I would be in that place if it wasn't for those people.
Yeah, because I've always thought of the Christian worldview is that we use things and money and resources and time to reach people, to love on people, to serve people. But the Hollywood model is that you use people to get what you want. And I think those two worldviews, they just disagree, and then they violently disagree, And I think if somebody is trying to bring the Christian worldview that, hey, you lay your life down for others versus expecting everyone else to lay their life down for yourself, I think that's something that it's not talked about much, but I think it's very powerful, right? Because I think when people start finding out that, hey, you're willing to, even if they treat you like garbage, but you're willing to say, you know what, I'm still going to love you like Christ has loved the church, right? I think that's what the world really needs. Yeah. In my own kind of like experience as a pastor, I think there's a big misconception that somehow millennials, were our generation, right? We're looking for the latest and coolest and the greatest thing. But really what we're looking for is being authentic. And I think if there's any pastors out there, right, like that is trying to reach this generation, I think my biggest advice would be just be real and don't be afraid to talk about like issues,
Yeah, because I mean, kids these days, they'll see right through it. Like, kids are so much more smarter than they were when we were growing up. Like at 16,
they literally have
mass information.
They have access to everything.
It's crazy.
Yeah, and I think especially because you grew up with Netflix, you can see what is acting, what is not, because you're so conditioned to see what is acting, what is not acting. So what would you say would be one of your greatest struggles, maybe that led to some mistakes that you've made, to be in that environment? What would you say would be like a mistake that maybe you've kind of encountered, that you've made, or a struggle that turned into a mistake and then kind of maybe led you away from community or so?
I think, I know that this was I remember this was the biggest thing was when I moved, I worked so much that I didn't know people outside of my like company.
Yeah.
You know, and I found myself in a place where I was getting burnt out and unhappy and really kind of getting really depressed. And I think if this was a mistake, I think it is a mistake in a way, but I think it was more of like I had to go through it to figure it out. But isolating myself really, you know, and just not stepping into community, not stepping into like being known, you know, like stepping into an environment where like you are comfortable, like you're allowing yourself to step out and be known. It's not easy, you know?
Yeah. Well, because if you want to be known, you have to be vulnerable.
Yeah, exactly. That's
and
what I'm trying to say.
You don't want to be vulnerable. Most of the time, we pull back from it because if you are vulnerable, then
you don't want to be hurt. You don't want to be hurt.
You don't want to be hurt.
Yeah. I mean, you don't want to be hurt, and so I think people get hurt so many times that they're just like they protect themselves. It's a protection mechanism, you know. Yeah. But I think there was a moment where I remember I called my best friend, and I'm like, it's time for me to go into community. It's time for me to like make myself known to other people, because there's beauty in community, because community takes the focus off of you as an individual and it puts focus on other people. And whenever you're helping other people or whenever you're putting focus on somebody else, you don't have time to be sad or depressed, because you're literally like, you're serving, you're doing what Christ essentially did.
You know, it's so weird, because I've seen so many people where, as I mentioned before, like you meet them and they're this amazing young kid, the 16, 17, 18, and then you meet them at 25 some years later and you're like, man, what happened to you? Because they're going through a really rough time. One, the other thing is that they have some very strange ideas, be it like some flat earth theory, or I don't even want to get into all that, but I'm saying like they have very extreme ideology.
Yeah.
And then you wonder why. Well, and then you find out it was because they isolated themselves and they did not balance their ideas out with community, right? Like they didn't bring their ideas and community to either be validated or be kind of like confronted about the things that they hold onto that they're not rooted in reality, right? So they take views to extremes. And because of that, like, they isolate themselves and then they kind of get into either they're extremely religious or they're extremely lascivious, where they go and they, do whatever they want to do, or they watch YouTube conspiracy theories and they have some ideas about what the world is. And so I think community I think God himself created us to be in community with himself and other people, right?
Right.
And we see that in family, we see that amongst friends. And the moment you isolate yourself, I think this is exactly where the enemy wants you. Yeah. Because this is where he can attack you. So
you're vulnerable. No one's standing to protect you. Essentially.
Yeah. So if you're younger, make sure you're part of community. How did you? Were you going to church at the time, or did you? How was that?
Yeah. When I came to LA, I had a few friends that were going to a church, and they basically invited me to come, and I went there, and I fell in love with the community there. So I just continued going there. I didn't really look around anymore after that. Yeah.
Awesome. So what would you say would be a struggle you found in church? Obviously, I think every single time we go to a church, like we think our church is the best. But I do believe that in general, we see a lot of young people that leave the church. That tells me that maybe they were looking for community. They were looking for certain things they did not find in church. So my question would be like, what do you think the church is doing or not doing to reach, the youth, be it in Hollywood or even here? Like, I think for me, for example, I think one of the reasons the church is failing at times is that we try to go with the latest trend, not necessarily be the church. I mean, I think if we think about the church, what makes the church stand out is the church is the bride of Christ, is something that the world can never offer. The church offers relationship with God, right? But in your experience, especially in Hollywood, why do you think some people, is it maybe previous past experiences? What would you say?
I think from my experience, people don't feel accepted per se, you know, so like they come to a church and they don't feel like anyone really cares or they see them. And I think a lot of times,
and just to pause right there, like that has to go beyond just being said hi to at church.
Right.
To feel accepted is not to, oh, I welcomed you to church.
Right.
It's more than that. It has to do with the fact, hey, I actually want to be involved in your life. And
I think honestly, it's a church culture thing. I don't think it starts from the youth service or whatever, you know, whatever churches have, but I think it starts really from the leadership. It has to be a main point for the church to have the vision of connecting with people and relationships has to be the most important thing, because people find their true identity in who they are in God in relationship with other people. So if you don't have that environment for people and they come and they leave and they don't have that fulfillment, because we all want to be known.
Yeah. That's a really interesting point that I want to kind of like emphasize. We at church put so much emphasis on preaching and worship, right? Which those things are very important. But I think we don't really put enough emphasis on fellowship, right? Which is like, hey, building relationships with one another. And I think this is where it needs to happen. I think fellowship is where the theology meets the practicality, right? Like where you actually exercise what you were told in the sermon.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, it's interesting because I feel like a lot of churches, and I don't want to generalize, you know, or like, this is just from my perspective. I feel like a lot of times pastors preach sermons on what not to do instead of really spending the time with their people and figuring out what they're going through and figuring out how to connect with them and help them through relationship. But instead, there's like this it's almost like this corporate feel where it's like the executive team is saying like, you have to do this, and if you don't do this, this is going to happen, and the people at the bottom are almost like in fear, you know. But if there was a communication where the leadership could connect with the people, and I think it just comes in community, really. Like, you will know your sheep if you spend time with them. You'll know them by name, you know? And so then you'll know who needs to, you know, fix their leg, or who needs a little trim, you know, whatever.
Exactly.
Right? So it's like,
that's good.
Honestly, like everything is built, like, I mean, the first church was built on community, literally.
Yeah, man. What would you say, like, obviously, I think how making sure that we reach Hollywood, and how we reach Hollywood is so important, because I think people in Hollywood have a lot of influence, and either that influence is going to be for good or for really bad things, right? And I think, as we mentioned at the beginning, is that there's a tendency to just ignore Hollywood or just kind of rebuke it. Instead of, I think we should not, you know, like we talked briefly before, like we should not try to ignore Hollywood, but try to understand and then reach it with the hope of Christ, you know, and because there's people in there that are hurting, and they're in desperate need. So how do you think there are practical ways that we can actually reach people? Because even though when we say Hollywood, it's LA, but I think Hollywood can be Seattle, because there's plenty of movies that are made in Seattle or Vancouver, BC, right? Like, so not as much, obviously, but you're gonna find creative people in Seattle or Portland or New York, right? Or anywhere, right? Because we're not just talking about Hollywood, we're talking about musicians, we're talking about YouTube stars and Instagrammers and so on and so forth. So what would be some practical ways that we can actually reach them, you know?
I mean, honestly, you know, for people not living in Hollywood, there's not much you can do.
You have to move there.
You have to move there. It's a different culture there, you know? It's funny because like we go to movies, we love them. We go to concerts, we love them. But then we cast judgment on the same people we go and watch.
The moment they make a mistake,
and we pay to watch them. We pay to watch their movies, but we judge them deep inside. Honestly, like what I really want to say is just like, I don't expect, I guess, living in Hollywood, I don't expect anyone to understand the culture or understand the people there. Just don't be quick to judge, because they're humans just like us. Like, I've spent time with celebrities before, and they're a lot of times they're really broken people, and the last thing they need is someone to keep pouring salt on the wound, right? And all they want is they want to connect with somebody real. They just want something real at the end of the day. And so really don't expect to understand what they're going through, but figure out a way of how you can improve your current environment, right? And how you can pray for people that are in power. For example, like the people in Hollywood, right? They are the ones that are controlling the airwaves. They're the ones that are coming out with the films. They're the ones with the millions of followers on Instagram.
If you control the airwaves, you control the message too. So
right. And so if because like honestly, like when I moved to LA, one of the things was on my heart was that you will influence the influential, right? And so for me, one of my missions, it's more of a lifestyle for me, as I want to be a friend to these people, because I understand that like through the relationship and through just having these conversations and being honest and raw, they will, they'll ask questions, and they're going to want to know about me and what I've went through. And then eventually, God will speak to them through something, and they will be inspired to do something about it. Right. Yeah. And then they'll post that on Instagram. And next thing you know, like for example, the other day, Chance the Rapper he read, I don't know if you heard about this. He read, he read the whole book of Galatians on Instagram Live.
That's awesome.
So like stuff like that happens. And I don't know what he's going through in his life right now, but even going through his music, you can really see that he's searching for God and he's searching for something. Yeah. And it was kind of cool just to see him do that. And 4,000 people on the live that were watching it. So he was reading, the Word of God. Yeah, that's just awesome.
Crazy. Here's one thing that I wanted to ask you. I usually try to ask people a lot this. What would be some advice you'd give yourself if you're 16? Or, because I'm pretty sure there's people watching right now. They're like, man, I'm trying to make it. What would you say?
I think the biggest thing is look at the people around you. Like, let's say the 4 or 5 people around you.
Yeah.
And ask yourself, do I want to be like them? Because if you don't, then you should switch them out real quick.
Because most likely you're going to
be like that person in like 5 or 10 years. Yeah. Like literally, you're going to become that person. So if you don't like that person or those people around you, make the conscious decision to sit down and really like analyze it. Because if you want to, if you want to start a family one day, or if you want to have a successful business, you can't be around people that are just
the opposite of that.
Doing whatever they do. I don't know, what kids do these days. So I think that's the biggest thing, because 16, 17 is just like a age where you really start to take a lot of paths in life. And if you choose the right one, if you have the right people supporting you, and I think another aspect of that is having a person in your life that you trust, that you can tell anything to, and just be honest and raw, and having like a constant feedback loop. Just like, hey, like, you shouldn't be doing this, or hey, you should be doing more of this. And then, you're going to be going towards the better.
Yeah. Wow. That's good. One thing that we haven't really mentioned, but one of the reasons that I even wanted you to come on this is that the whole point of these talks is to kind of highlight people in our community, or people that I know, that don't just live for today, but live in light of eternity. People that decided that, hey, every single choice that I make, matters not just for today or tomorrow, but it will impact my legacy here on earth, but also my eternity. So my question is, how do you, practically live in light of eternity? I can give you some examples. What I do is obviously what I do in church is, I remember this great line by C.S. Lewis where he says that anytime you meet a person, you either draw them closer to Christ or farther away from him, So what are some practical ways that you are consciously living every single day? Not just like, oh, how do I feel like living today? Like, do I want to sleep in, or do I want to, but it's more about, hey, today matters, not just for, today, but also for eternity.
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's something that I have really been going through for the last 2 years and figuring out what works for me. And I realized every time I'm not doing devotions in the morning or throughout the day, if I don't set aside time for God, I don't put that word in me. I don't spend that time just listening and just being there in silence. It really affects the way my life really goes, and my thought life and everything, So for me, really, I make it a point, and I'm not really saying this because like I'm trying to be super religious or anything, but I think starting your day off with just silence and just being just meeting God, and just putting that word in you and just spending that time with devotion, I think really will set you up for a successful day in business and whatever you're doing, because there's wisdom there, you know? But for me, through and through, that has literally been probably one of the biggest things, because for me, like every single day is different. One day could be a roller coaster, the other day nothing could be happening. But even I remember the other day, I woke up and, you know, I did my morning routine. I went to the gym. You know, I did my devotion, and my phone blew up after that. Like there's a business
emergency that
something happened where like I was in a very intense situation, and if I wasn't, you know, got my mind rooted that morning, I was so stressed out that day. Like literally, it's probably one of the most stressful days of 2018.
Yeah.
You know? Crazy. So I realized, I'm like, dang, I'm so happy I did that.
Yeah. I remember Martin Luther said that, like, I have so much to do today that I cannot but spend 3 hours in devotion. So he's like, for me to get the stuff that I need to get done, I have to spend it with the Lord first. Because, I mean, the first thing that we do is we look at our phones when we wake up, right? And then it's usually really good news or bad news or no news.
Right.
So why not actually go into devotion first and then check your phone and so on and so forth?
Yeah.
Cool, man. Well, I'm so thankful you came on, bro. And I'm excited to see what God's going to do through you in Hollywood. And I'm just excited that God is raising up people like you that is trying to impact not just kind of like the spiritual side of Hollywood, but also the culture, people to be more gentle and kind. And that's what I'm looking forward to. So guys, we would love if you guys can maybe put in the comments below, maybe some of the reasons you don't go to church. If you've been hurt by the church, or I'd love to know what those reasons are.
Yeah.
Right. I think that was one issue that we were talking before this, and we're like, man, how do we reach to people that, you know, been to church and they're like, I want nothing to do with it.
Right.
You know, obviously we cannot change it unless we actually know what needs to change. You know, so I would love to hear from you guys. Again, thank you so much for watching. Would love if you can subscribe. And until next time, thank you, Dennis, for being on here.
Of course, man. Thanks for having me, man.
Loved it, bro.
Thank you, bro.
God bless.